Hello, I'm Karen Stathoplos, and today I'm going to be reading you a story that I wrote. It's not really a story, it actually happened. After college, my best friend Deb and I traveled to two exciting cities, New Orleans and San Francisco, and many fine adventures happened there. But I'm not writing about that. We found that we traveled well together because really strange travel things happened to both of us, and we were both kind of okay with it. So this is the tale of one. It's called We Were on Our Way Back from New Orleans. We had stopped to see Williamsburg, which was really exciting. And this is just the tale of what happened trying to get out of Richmond. Incident at Richmond. A true tale of mirth and woe. I wrote this in June 1977. So the characters and the events related herein are absolutely true to life, and it is no good pretending they are not. Okay. Deb and I bid farewell to charming Williamsburg at 3:05 p.m. and boarded the bus back to Richmond, from which station we would make close connections for the bus to New York. I couldn't remember exactly what time the man at information had said the bus left from Richmond, but we were supposed to get into Richmond at 4:05, and my mind vaguely recalled 4:25 as departing time. This would leave us 20 minutes to assemble ourselves. But as I said to Deb as we relaxed into our seats, all we have to do is get all our stuff out of that locker and then check the more monstrous pieces onto the New York bus. Anyone could see it was going to be a piece of cake. Such a quaint, unfailing trust we had. It was only later when Deb looked at her watch and noticed that it was 4 p.m. that we began to take interest in the progress of our bus. It was moving lethargically along, quite heedless of schedules and people with close connections to make. We weren't even near anything that remotely resembled Richmond. As minutes passed, with no noticeable improvement in the situation, I hoped fervently that I had remembered wrong about the departure time of our bus. We quickly decided that as soon as we pulled into Richmond, we would separate so as to accomplish twice as much. And if we missed the first connection, we would not develop ulcers over what we knew to be an 8-hour wait for the next bus to New York. Our bus moseyed into Richmond Station at 4:20. Deb and I both bolted for the door with our miscellaneous belongings streaming behind us. Deb dashed over to information to verify departure time in case we still had a chance to make it, and I stayed behind to pick up our two monstrous suitcases that we had checked through at Williamsburg. The cute guy who sent us off the day before is there again today. As he drags out the luggage, he asks me, "Well, did you have a good time?" "Wondrous," I reply, not feeling extremely conversational at the moment. I struggle into my blue calico knapsack effect, sling several extracurricular pieces over my shoulder, and then, loaded down with two suitcases besides, manage to lumber my way through a door and up a flight of stairs. This all much to the delight of the malingering mob, who thought no doubt that the circus had come to town. I see Deb way down at information and decide to haul my burdens over to our locker, inside of which we had crammed the ungodly remainder of our luggage the previous day. I remember suddenly that Deb has the key. Isn't this just the best fun? Some demon inside me observes. Ignoring him, I stand there, humming a hopeful sort of hum and twiddling my thumbs, since I don't dare rush off and leave our valuables at the mercy of those unscrupulous wretches who frequent bus stations with the express intent of sneaking off with other people's 200-pound suitcases. I have just decided that we're going to have to resign ourselves to 8 hours in this beautiful station when Deb appears. She is doing a sort of half-run, half-walk effect down a long aisle past a bunch full of humanity who have been eagerly awaiting the next act. She says excitedly to me, "We're okay, but he says I have to go see the dispatcher because the guy took too many slips off our tickets yesterday." Silence. It is only with the most excruciating self-control that I am able to restrain myself from slapping her. She is obviously keyed up, and just because I have not understood a word she just uttered, it's no reason to get violent. Is it really necessary that I comprehend the situation, I ask myself. Myself has no time for idle chit-chat. I confine myself to her first two words, "We're okay." Now, here was a dilemma. The words themselves convey reassurance, but her manner of uttering them did not. She seemed to imply that while gloom and despair weren't exactly upon us, they were breathing down our necks pretty heavily. Perhaps it was just that she had mentioned to me earlier on the bus that she had a dreadful headache, but even as we speak, I could see that the girl looked decidedly pained. I decided not to bother her with such frivolous questions as, "What time does the bus leave, then?" I sighed instead, and she fished and fumbled in her bag for the key to our locker. Finally, she had it, pushed it into the lock. It wouldn't turn. As she struggled, it occurred to me that the hammers on her brain were interfering with her manual dexterity. Let me try that. So much for cleverness. The key simply would not budge. It fit the lock perfectly, but it just sat there gaping at us with a stupid grin on its face. Suddenly, Deb burst out with, "Oh, you have to deposit 50 cents to open it, too." I read the instructions again and raised my eyebrow. They said no such thing, and I told her as much. She gave me a drop-dead look and said hotly, "It says right here, deposit 50 cents and insert key." Not wanting to explain to the irrational creature before me that the key was already inserted and that we had deposited 50 cents yesterday, I pulled her closer to the lock. "Do you see any place to deposit 50 cents? I asked the girl, who seemed to be dead set on forcing the quarters through the keyhole if there was no other way. I was relieved when she stopped looking at me as if I were some revolting specimen in her parasitology department at Tulane. After all, I wanted to get that foolish luggage out as much as she did, and strange to tell, even I was not feeling my usual merry and frolicsome self. It did not seem to me an opportune moment. Inspired by desperation, I said, "I'll dash down and ask the baggage man to help us with this stupid thing." Off I rushed to the counter. There was nobody in sight, except every now and then I could see uniforms flitting among boxes about a mile back. I stood there underneath my wide-brimmed hat, looking like a lost soul and hoping I had wandered by mistake into somebody else's bad dream. Eventually, some chap noticed me and came sauntering over. Impatiently, I waved. "Would you help us open our locker? The key won't work." He mumbled, "Well, when did you leave your luggage there?" "Yesterday." "Ah, then that's why you can't open it now," he said in one of the more unenlightening remarks of the decade. He opened a book and casually began to thumb through. I was prevented from screaming just then by Deb, who came running up with, "Did you find out why the key doesn't work? Oh, help, my head is killing me." I said loudly that this chap seemed to know what he was doing, even if he was doing it very slowly. One problem was on the verge of being solved. Meanwhile, Deb was hopping to be off to the dispatcher's. Who, in God's name, the dispatcher was and why we needed him at this particular moment in trauma were matters beyond my concern. It was evident from Deb's agitation that our tickets needed a dispatcher's attention, or we would not be allowed to board the New York bus. Hence, I thrust my ticket into her fidgeting hands, and she stated her plan to zoom over to the dispatch office, while I waited for Speedy Gonzales to open our locker so I could unload it. This was a fine plan, except for the minor detail that Deb didn't have the faintest idea how to go about finding this office. She started wandering vaguely off, and with a little prodding from me, Speedy yelled directions after her. "You go through that door, up a stairway." I left the girl to fend for herself. I still didn't know when our bus was leaving, but resigned myself to facing one thing at a time. I waited for this whirlwind of activity to be of help, resisting with difficulty the impulse to begin chanting, "Faster than a speeding bullet." It seemed hours, but the boy finally did make his first and last impressive move. He got the key in our lock to turn. I yanked the locker door open and was greeted enthusiastically by a bag full of grapefruits, which my cohort had cunningly squished in last. They fairly leaped out of their enforced confinement and were closely followed by a loaded shopping bag and Afghan. I thought I heard several of the onlookers begin to cheer. Evidently, they thought a juggling act would follow. Heedless of my fans, I gazed in incredulous horror at the horrendous amount of luggage before me. I pulled out bag after poster after flowers, and then, when the whole mess was on the floor about me, one despicable item still leered out at me, a thing so loathsome, so awesome in its awfulness that I wanted to cry. A crate of oranges. I wondered what madness had possessed me to say to Annette, "Oh, how lovely! Won't Mum be surprised? She adores oranges. We all do. It costs too much to send them by freight. I'll bring them as part of my luggage. No problem." Ludicrous, that's what it was, sheer idiocy. Who wanted 200 pounds of oranges from Florida anyway? I regarded them with great distaste and an impending feeling of doom. I couldn't bring myself to reach in and lift them out. Besides, I wasn't going anywhere. I let them lie. So I stood, my knapsack on my back, my hat falling off my head, an alarming ton of luggage surrounding me, wondering if the line forming in Zone 3 was for our bus, and wishing that all those people sitting on benches would stop staring at me. I got the distinct impression that if I didn't keep my hat on my head, someone would throw coins into it. After a few decades, Deb came dashing up, quite out of breath, and waving 2 little cards which would allow us to board the bus to New York, if it was still here. The vision of this creature hopping on first one foot and then the next was more than I could bear. The suspense became totally unendurable. I shrieked, "What time does our bus leave?" Still hopping, she replied, 4:35. Oh, Lord, I thought in despair, if it isn't 4:35, by now it never will be. I said a very quick prayer for the long delay of departure for the New York bus. It was clear that Deb was quite as appalled as I at the sight of all our personal effects from 3 months in New Orleans. I informed her that I had overheard a baggage chap saying that all bulk luggage had to be checked right at the bus. She groaned in disbelief. It was a charming thought. It meant we had to lug all our suitcases, tote bags, etc., and 200 pounds of oranges out there ourselves. To comfort myself, I thought of people who had lifted tractors to save someone's life. We must have some sort of chance, no matter how picayune. We are both in a hurry to take some positive action. "What zone are we in?" I asked Deb quickly. With a suitcase and a tote in her arms, she looked vacantly at me and said, "Zone?" "Yes, what zone are we leaving from?" I asked again. She shrugged her shoulders in an alarming manner and said, "Don't you know?" I wanted to throw something, preferably something old and rare and valuable. How in the world did she expect me to know what zone when she had been the one chatting with information chaps and dispatchers? I'm quite fond of the girl, but I wanted to kill her. Meanwhile, the people who had been in line in Zone 3 began to move out the door to a bus. In desperation, Deb got herself into that line. "Are you sure they're going to New York?" I called after her. "I think so," she yelled back, making it all up and hoping it was true. I stood there like a chump, wringing my hands and still reluctant to leave a pile of unguarded luggage. When Deb was nearly to the door, she shouted, "Pick up a suitcase and come on." I grabbed the brown bruiser and leaving half of our worldly loot prey to the conniving bus station mob, I lugged it down the stairs and stood at the end of the line. Deb was through the door, and it was only then that I realized she still had my ticket, and the man at the door wouldn't let me through without seeing my ticket. I stood there looking frantic, watching Deb converse with our talkative luggage chap. It was then, with the bus engines roaring, that one detail of the idyllic scene before me impressed itself upon my somewhat dimmed consciousness. Deb was checking her luggage onto a bus marked for Ottawa, Canada. It was an entrancing situation. The man at the door wouldn't let me through because I didn't have my ticket, and I didn't have my ticket because Deb had it, and she was busy checking her luggage to Ottawa, Canada, while a bus marked New York City was standing directly behind her. Moreover, she couldn't hear me yelling at her to bring me my ticket, so why should I think she could hear me yelling, "Ottawa"? She did look over at me once, and I gestured wildly and pointed to the bus marked New York behind her. She smiled and nodded absently. The whole situation didn't impress me a heck of a lot. Not even the fact that the bus was there comforted me. As far as I could see, we were a long way from being aboard it. I pondered the effect upon my psyche of seeing the New York bus pull away while I stood helplessly by. It was not inspiring. Then, all at once, over the roar of the engines came Deb's faint shout. "Go and get more stuff! He'll let you through!" My grasp of the situation at this time was exceedingly low. I dropped the suitcase just inside the door and ran witlessly back up the steps to the locker. The oranges were still there. I decided to take the fierce approach, thereby depriving my audience of the sight of a demoralized wretch sobbing and kicking her heels on the floor. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, a firm hold, and clutching that fearful lot of fruit in my arms, I tottered down the steps. Just about then, who should come back into the station but Deb? She was going back for another load herself, and she yelled encouragingly to me, "Don't worry. I told him that I had tickets for the two of us. He'll let you through." Thus it was with confidence in my soul that I made my unsteady approach. At the door, I spoke up from behind the citrus. "My friend went through already, and she told you that she had tickets for two. I'm the other half." The man made puzzled-sounding noises, and I peered at him over the crate. "Don't you remember?" I asked, panic starting to rise in my throat. I would certainly drop the fruit on his feet if he didn't let me through soon. "It was the girl in the green dress," I explained frantically. This did not produce the cheerful, enlightened look I wanted to see. I grimaced and tried to get a firmer grasp on the unwieldy package. Oh, help! Just then, the girl in the green dress came hurrying up. "Here she is!" I cried in relief. Didn't you give him both of our tickets?" I asked Deb. Yes, she assured me. Meanwhile, this chap has been looking through the tickets in his hand, and improvements in this impossible situation do not seem to be forthcoming. "No," he says. "I don't have anything here. Are you sure it wasn't another man you saw? A black man?" he asked Deb finally. "Yes, that must be it," she cried, not knowing, obviously, whether she had given our tickets to a black man, a yellow man, a green man, or an oversized mongoose. But it was the right thing to say. The man at the door brought her over to a bus, pushed her face in front of some chap who recognized her, and reassured the new fellow that we were legal. It was a good thing, too, because I was about ready to scream and fall into a fruity heap on the cement. I practically lunged into the arms of our cute, talkative baggage chap. After thrusting the oranges into his arms, I regained my equilibrium and shouted, "Check that to New York City, not Ottawa." Then I raced back inside to retrieve the abandoned brown suitcase. I dropped this monstrous piece dangerously close to some interested toes and told him breathlessly that this had to go to New York too. Then I stayed there to make sure that he didn't whisk it onto the Ottawa bus as he had Deb's luggage moments before. Just then, Deb leaped off of the New York bus and yelled to me that she had reserved us a seat in it. The plot of this suspense-filled drama was less clear to me than ever. It was obvious that Deb knew we were supposed to be on the New York bus because she had found us seats. But the vivid image of her big suitcase being locked up in the hold of the bus to Ottawa haunted my brain. Still, this was hardly the time for idle gossip. If, for some obscure reason, she wanted her luggage to tour the Canadian countryside, what business was it of mine? She was looking a trifle less traumatized at this moment, and I didn't want to distress her with minor details. She called, "You got all your stuff now?" in a voice which betrayed her confidence that I did, in fact, have all my stuff. Poor deluded child. "Good heavens, no!" I shouted back. "There's still 2 or 3 totes, my poster, and my flowers hanging around in front of the locker." She paled visibly and was off like a shot. Of course, it was far from reassuring to realize that all of the passengers had boarded a good 10 minutes ago, and we were the only 2 creatures running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Meanwhile, the baggage chap is taking his merry old conversational time. I tell him New York again, just to be sure. He says to me, "What's a pretty girl like you doing going to New York City? You look like a Southern girl to me." Heaven knows the dreadful propaganda he's heard about Northern girls. I decided against a sarcastic retort, as he might pack me off to Ottawa just for the sport of the thing. I give him my best Southern girl dripping with honey smile, and then dash off to join Deb in one last speedy check for personal litter. All was clear, and we chortled wildly as we made the final race down the steps and out the door, leaving hundreds of disappointed fans behind us. We were just boarding the bus when the baggage chap called to me and told me to get my friend back out and he'd switch her luggage onto the New York bus. All this and heaven too. The switch took place and we just had time to fall into our seats when the bus pulled out. The immensity of the thing was hard to comprehend. We had really done it. We both started to giggle, and we kept right at it until we were in uncontrollable hysterics. It was days before we could look at an orange without making an absolute spectacle of ourselves. Thank you.